This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? Words, yes, by Henry II, but repeated by Judge Chutkan yesterday in her courtroom to make her point that at times leaders and people that see as leaders can, by making a wish out loud, actually exhort and command their followers to do violence. This came up, this history lesson, courtesy of Judge Chutkan, which I'm sure fell on deaf ears with John Lauro, the lawyer for Donald Trump, came up when John Lauro was pushing the judge to allow his client, in the face of a gag order that she ultimately established, because for no other reason than Donald Trump's bad behavior and misconduct up until this point, which she's observed and the Department of Justice has alerted her to, said to John Lauro, your client is a criminal defendant facing 4 felony charges. He doesn't get to say whatever he wants at any time. Do you agree with that? And John Lauro said, 100%, Judge. It's one of the few times that John Lauro wasn't busy being impertinent and fighting inappropriately with the judge and claiming that she was about to censor him because she disagreed with his argument in court, something I've never seen with an advocate and a federal judge before in my 32 years. But she also got him right where she wanted him. And she said when they were talking about speech and him saying what he wanted and reminding him once again, as she always does, that he is an ordinary criminal defendant, that the election cycle is going to yield to her swift administration of justice in her courtroom. This came up when John Lauro, for the 4th time in the case, asked for another adjournment and postponement of the trial date. And the judge made it clear, never to be raised again. This trial is going forward in March of 2024 without further delay. And when she said, what I like about Judge Chutkan, I like many things about Judge Chutkan. Go look at a hot take I just did on her background just this week and her steely demeanor and her patriotism that brings her to this moment in time. But she said to John Lauro, painting him into his own corner, as only she can do, she said, in what world or in what case do you think it's appropriate for a criminal defendant to call the prosecutor a thug and remain on the streets, meaning not be found in contempt and not be put in jail in pretrial detention? What world is that, Mr. Lauro? And he started to argue about his right to Trump's right to campaign and criticize and First Amendment. That's all they really have. And the judge reminded him that violent rhetoric is not going to be tolerated. And that's when she brought up the Henry II reference, in which Henry II of England, the King of England at the time, in 1170, in Christmas, while he was sitting in Normandy, was having a lot of difficulties and embarrassment difficulties with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. And he said aloud, will no one rid me of this? It's sometimes been interpreted as meddlesome or turbulent. Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? To which 4 knights responded to this command, which is what they interpreted it as, and they went from Normandy to Canterbury and they assassinated the Archbishop. And the judge brought that up. I'm sure Lauro had no idea where that literary reference was coming from, about the where a wish can be converted into a command in the wrong hands and on the wrong minds. And that's what she's worried about. She said, I'm going to lay out the map for you, geography of what your client can and can't say. And this is Judge Chutkan trying to thread the needle and allow Donald Trump to voice his objections without violent rhetoric to the prosecution. She said he can generally criticize the prosecution or the case. He can't use violent rhetoric against prosecutors, families, staff, and other people just doing their job in the criminal justice system. She had to remind Lauro once again, which I love, and I'll show a picture here of her docket entry where she entered her order verbally, subject to a written order that we expect later today in the next couple of days. She reminds everybody that Donald Trump is a defendant who is out on bond conditions and personal recognizance, meaning he is a part of and supervised by the U.S. criminal justice system. And that puts automatic limits and guardrails around his conduct, unlike any that he's ever seen or that he's respected. And so when you're on the other side of these arguments and the judge early in the proceedings is not only laughing and shaking your heads when John Lauro is saying things like that are laughable, like Donald Trump's been on his best behavior and there's been no conduct that requires a gag order. And she raised the issue, besides basically laughing in John Lauro's face and nodding and shaking her head. Never a good sign when you're an advocate before a federal judge, and I know that from my own experience, having not had that on the other end, because I don't make ridiculous and ludicrous arguments to undermine my own credibility. She said she was very troubled by the earlier in October attacks by Donald Trump while he was at the fraud trial in New York against Judge Engoron's law clerk, in which she was doxxed, embarrassed, and again, we're back to the Henry II. Won't anyone rid me of this meddlesome judge, effectively? And she was very troubled by that. And she said, it is necessary for me to impose a gag order in order so that we're not back here again and it has real teeth and consequences as I continue to administer justice. But her constant reminder when pushed that Donald Trump is an ordinary defendant that's going to be treated that way in that courtroom, regardless of his day job running for office or his former day job being the president of the United States, is important. And it's her moral compass and her judicial compass, her North Star, that guides her in making these rulings. They're all consistent with that approach. Now, Trump likes to call her a biased, Trump-hating socialist judge, and Smith a thug. And after he does things like that, again, the Henry II reference, his followers do crazy things and violent things, like make an assassination threat against Judge Chutkan by making a phone call to her chamber.